My name is Paul Wolliver. I'm the owner of Pinellas Power Products, and this is the installation instruction video for my extended runtime fuel kits for open frame inverter generators running the Honda clone engine of 301 cc's all the way to the 459 cc. The Honda clone engines are easily identified because the valve cover is held on by a single center bolt as opposed to 4 or 5 perimeter bolts. So if you're watching this video and you want to know if this kit will fit your generator and it's not listed on my website, if your generator does not have a single center bolt on the valve cover, the answer is no, it won't fit. Real quickly, if you're watching this video on YouTube and you want to get in touch with me, if you look in the description section of this video, it has a link to my website where you can see my email address and my phone number. Please do not attempt to contact me through YouTube. I do not monitor YouTube or any of the chat rooms. I simply don't have time. If you have a relevant comment to leave that doesn't require a reply from me, then feel free to go ahead and leave your comment in the comments section. With that, let's go ahead and get started. This kit will include all the parts that you're going to need to install it onto one of the open frame inverter generators running the Honda clone engine between 301 cc's and 459 cc's. You'll have a small bag of parts, a fuel pump, fuel filter, roll of Teflon tape, a fuel hose, a Yamaha fuel hose with the prime bulb and quick disconnects on each end. You'll have a section of 1/4 inch fuel hose and a section of 3/16 inch fuel hose. The most important part in this small bag of parts is going to be this flash drive. And this will contain a copy of the video that you're watching right now. As I stated earlier, this kit is going to fit any open frame inverter generator running the Honda clone 301 cc to 459 cc engine. For the purpose of this video, we're going to be installing it on the Westinghouse EcoGen 10,000. There are some slight differences between the Westinghouse, the Predator, the Champion, and so forth. But for our purpose, the only thing that you will see different is going to be the color of the generator itself. Some of them have different, like they have an additional fuel selector lever on the front, or some of them have a, I believe the Champion has a choke here, and I'm not sure if the Predator does or not. But at any rate, for the portion that we're going to be dealing with, you will not see a difference other than the color. Okay, here's the valve cover on this engine. You'll note that this valve cover is held on with a single center bolt, and that is how you identify the Honda clone engines real quickly. If your generator has 4 or 5 bolts on the valve cover, this kit will not work. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on the install. My kit is going to come with some hose clamps, and there's going to be 2 different sizes of hose clamps. You'll notice that the one on the right is larger than the one on the left. So the first thing you're going to do is take one of the larger hose clamps and put it around the factory breather hose. And then you're going to squeeze down 3 clicks. And this is simply to restrict the amount of air flowing through the stock breather hose. So we'll squeeze till it clicks down 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And if you look at it, you'll see that the hose has now hourglassed down just a little bit. Then we're going to remove the factory valve cover bolt and replace it with the one that's included in my kit. So now we're going to remove the factory valve cover bolt and replace it with the one that's included in my kit. That's the factory valve cover bolt. And here's the one that's included in my kit. You notice the one included in my kit has a pulse port built into the bolt. So we'll go ahead and snug this bolt down. And once the bolt is snugged down, we can take and rotate just the pulse port because it's pressed in. So we get the bolts, there it goes. So then we'll hold the bolt with the wrench and rotate the pulse port to where it points in the same direction as the factory breather hose. My kit will come with 2 pieces of Velcro. This piece will be attached to the fuel pump. This piece will be put on the corner of the air box. The reason that I'm Velcroing the fuel pump on instead of bolting it on is it makes it a lot easier to clean, inspect, or replace the air filter if you need to at any time. So we're going to go ahead and put 1/2 of the Velcro on the air box, and I like to put the stiff side on the air box and the soft side on the fuel pump. So now we'll go get the fuel pump. The fuel pump comes in a plastic bag. The port that lines up very close to this gold mesh is the pulse port. This port is a fuel inlet, and you'll notice it's covered with a cap. And this port is the fuel output, and it's also covered with a cap. We'll take and we'll put the soft piece of Velcro on the back of the fuel pump. And we'll stick that on the Velcro. You want the fuel output to be pointing this direction, right toward the recoil start, the pulse line and the fuel input to be pointing straight up. And just stick it to the Velcro, just like that. Okay. Now we're going to take the 3/16 inch diameter hose from the kit and cut a 13-inch section of that. We're going to take just a little bit of oil and put it on the pulse fitting that we just installed. We'll take our 13-inch long section of 3/16 hose and slide it onto the pulse port. And the oil makes it a little easier to slide it in place. So it goes on like so. Then we'll take the hose, we will feed it behind this factory hose, right below the fuel selector valve, and it'll come out right here next to the fuel selector valve and just above the air filter. Okay, here's the 3/16 hose we just installed. You'll notice it comes down right next to the air filter. Okay, the next thing we'll do is take the 1/4 inch hose included in the kit and cut a 5 1/4 inch section of this hose. Then in the bag of small parts, we'll look. There are going to be 3 adapters that go from 1/4 inch to 3/16. So we're going to take one of these and use it to connect this 1/4 inch hose to the 3/16 hose that we just put on there. Okay, so here is our little adapter. We've got some oil on it. We're going to slide the 3/16 inch end into the 3/16 hose we just put on earlier. Then we're going to get a little bit of oil on the 1/4 inch end of it and slide our 1/4 inch hose onto that. The other end of the 1/4 inch hose is going to slide onto the pulse port of the fuel pump. And this is the fuel pump right here. And of course the center port, the one that lines up very close to this gold mesh screen, is the pulse port. So we're going to take just a little bit of oil, put it on the pulse port of the fuel pump, and then we will slide our pulse line onto that. Okay, now you'll notice that above the air box is the fuel selector valve. Now this particular generator is a Westinghouse, so it only has this fuel selector valve here. If you're using, I think Champion has a couple of different models that have an additional fuel selector up front, and you're not going to be concerned with the fuel selector knob up front. We're going to go straight to the fuel selector that's on the bottom of the fuel tank. And the hose that's coming out of that is a fuel line going to the carburetor. So we're going to open up the Corbin clamp, and when I get it off, I will show you how Corbin clamps work. So then we're going to slide this hose off of the fuel selector valve. Corbin clamps will have 2 little tabs sticking down. You take a pair of pliers and squeeze the tabs together, and that opens up the clamp. When you release the clamp, or the tabs, the clamp closes down. So we're going to leave this clamp on the factory hose. It will be reused. Now what we're going to do is take the 1/4 inch hose in the kit and cut off a 29 inch section of this 1/4 inch hose. We will get another of the 1/4 to 3/16 adapters from the bag of small parts. So now we're going to take just a little bit of oil and dip the 3/16 end of this adapter in the oil, and we're going to plug the 3/16 end of this adapter into this factory 3/16 hose that we just removed from the fuel selector valve. And then we'll slide the Corbin clamp into place where it clamps the hose nicely onto the adapter. Then we'll put a little bit of oil on the 1/4 inch end of this adapter and slide the hose that we just cut onto it. Now what we're going to do is, you'll see that there are a couple of plastic pieces on the Westinghouse sticking up. I believe the Champion only has one of these plastic flanges, but at any rate, what we're going to do is we're going to take this hose, and instead of hooking to the fuel selector valve where it used to go, we're going to turn it this way. We're going to wrap it around the blower housing, which is this area here, and recoil start, and it is going to go on to the output port of the fuel pump. So what we'll do, we're going to put just a little bit of oil on the output port of the fuel pump, and we'll slide the other end of this hose onto it. You'll notice that the only hose clamp I've put in place so far on the fuel lines is the factory Corbin clamp. Once everything is in place, we're going to go back and install hose clamps everywhere that a hose clamp is needed. But right now we're putting everything together, and if we have to adjust the length of a hose, shorten it just a little bit or something, we can do that. So now we've got the pulse line done already, and the fuel output line that goes from the fuel pump to the carburetor already done. So now we need to work on the side that is fuel coming into the fuel pump. So the next step will be to take our section of 1/4 inch hose, and we're going to cut a 13-inch section of that. Then, in our bag of small parts, we're going to take the fuel T-fitting. And what we'll do is, with the T-fitting, this barb on the T-fitting will go into the end of this 13-inch section of hose we just cut. Next thing we're going to do is take our section of 1/4 inch hose, and we're going to cut an 8-inch section of it. We may very well have to trim this later. Okay? You'll notice that the hoses are cut off of a roll of hose. So we've installed the 13-inch section of hose onto the bottom barb such that it swings off to the right. So we're going to dip the left barb into the oil, and now we're going to install the 8-inch section of hose on this. Now what we're going to do is we're going to spin this so that the 8-inch section points up slightly, and then we're going to install the fuel filter. You'll notice that the fuel filter has arrows, and they point in the direction of fuel flow. So we'll get just a little bit of oil on the white end, and push it in to this 8-inch section of hose that we just installed. Next, we're going to go ahead and cut ourselves another section of hose, 5.5 inches long, and it will be installed in this end of the fuel filter. Like so. Okay. Our last piece of 1/4 inch hose is going to be cut to 6 inches. We're going to take and dip this barb of our T-fitting into the oil, and we'll slide our 6-inch hose onto that. We'll spin it so that the natural curve of the hose points up. Now we'll take our last 1/4 inch to 3/16 adapter, dip the 1/4 inch end of it into the oil, and slide that into the last section of hose that we just installed. Then we'll take our section of 3/16 inch hose and cut a 22-inch section of that. Then we'll dip the 3/16 end of the adapter into the oil. Slide our 3/16 hose onto that. And this is going to be our fuel input line. This will come from the remote fuel fitting. This will connect to the stock fuel selector valve, and this will go on to the fuel pump. So let's go ahead and install it now. Okay, so this is our fuel input line, and this goes to the remote tank fitting. This goes to the input on the fuel pump, and this goes to the fuel selector valve that we removed the factory hose from earlier. So what I'm going to do is, included in the kit, there are several small zip ties, like so. I'm just going to loosely zip tie this to the original breather line coming off the valve cover, and that's just to hold it in place. Okay, so we've got our zip tie in place right here. This is the hose that will connect to the fuel pump input side. So we'll tuck this right behind this metal frame, and it'll hang down in front of the airbox. This is going to be the fuel input line. So we're going to take it and push up on it just a little bit, and it'll slide behind this part of the frame between the frame member and the fuel tank. We want all the hose bends to be a nice smooth radius to them. This hose, with the section of 3/16 hose, we're going to take and run it under the carburetor, and then we'll come around this side. This is the 3/16 hose that we just passed through underneath the carburetor. You'll notice that what we did, here's the hose, it goes above this bracket beneath the carburetor and right between the blower housing and the air box. So now it comes out right between the blower housing and the air box, and it's going to come up and hook to this barb on the fuel selector valve. Now you notice the length that we've got it cut to is longer than it needs to be, and all the hoses can be trimmed shorter, but it's a pain to try and lengthen them, so that's why I have you cut them a little bit longer. So just eye it and make sure that it has all nice smooth bends. I'm going to mark it with my thumbnail where I want to cut it, and I'm going to go ahead and cut it. Then I'm going to take a little bit of oil and put on this end of it, and then slide it onto the fuel selector valve. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide it behind the original factory hose that used to connect to the fuel selector valve. And above the pulse line. And I'll go ahead and show you a close-up as soon as I get this in place. So you'll see that this is the 3/16 hose that we just ran. Goes up next to the blower housing. It goes underneath the original hose that used to connect to the fuel selector valve, which we've now got to the adapter. It then goes around in a loop over our pulse hose and slides on to the fuel selector valve barb right here. If you look on the frame of the generator, there's a panel right through here. On the Westinghouses, this panel has a series of holes drilled in it. On the Champions, I believe it is a solid panel, and on the, I think on the Predators, it's got some grooves pressed into it. I don't remember for certain. But at any rate, on this panel, stick your hand behind it and make sure that there is nothing directly behind. If you measure approximately 1 3/4 inches down and 2 1/4 inches over from the front of this panel and drill your hole. But stick your hand behind it just to make sure that it's clear. So I'm going to go ahead and mark my hole. And this is not an extremely precise measurement where it has to go. Just make sure that you're not going to hit anything behind it. So we're going to mark the hole, and then we're going to drill it to put our fuel fitting in it. Okay, so we've marked our hole, and now we're going to drill it to put our fuel fitting in it. And this will be the fuel fitting, and we're going to drill it out just large enough for the threaded portion of the fuel fitting to fit through it, and then we'll be screwing this hose barb on from the back, and it'll create a pinch right here that clamps onto the metal bracket. So let's go ahead and start drilling our hole. Okay, we've gotten it very close with the step drill. I'm going to use a repairman's reamer to get just the last little bit. I don't want to go too big with it. Almost there. Okay, now what I'm going to do is scrape the burrs off of it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the Teflon tape included in the kit and wrap it around the threads of the fuel fitting. When you wrap it around the threads, be sure not to overlap the end. In other words, here's the end. Do not wrap it like that, because when you screw the hose barb on, it'll cut off this piece of Teflon tape, and that will get lodged in the fuel filter, and we don't want any more debris in the fuel filter than is necessary. So now we've got our Teflon tape in place. We're going to go ahead and put a 1/2 inch washer included in the kit, and then slide this through the hole that we just drilled. I'm going to aim the barbs downward because as the fuel hose is running along the ground, it'll turn and go up to the fuel fitting. And now we have our fuel fitting with the hose barb installed right here above the air box. So now what we're going to do is take the hose with the fuel filter and slide it onto the hose barb that's on the back of this. I'm going to take a 1/2 inch off of this end of it also. Take another 1/2 inch off of this end. Inch off between the hose barb and the filter. So now it's going to end up right about here. I'm going to take another 1/2 inch off of this. I think it'll line up a little better. Yeah, I like that better. We'll put a little bit of oil on our hose and we'll slide it onto the back of our fuel fitting. Okay, when you're done with the install, pay particular attention to this area right here. This hose, where it goes on to the fuel filter, if it goes straight up and then turns, it will kink that hose. And then your problem is going to be it'll run perfectly on the stock tank, but it won't run well on the remote tank because the remote fuel line is kinked right here. So when you go to check for your sharp kinks and stuff like that, be sure that it doesn't kink right where it comes out of the filter. So you can either move the filter over closer to the fuel inlet port so that the hose here comes in a radius turn down, or extend this hose to where it's longer when it goes in. This is the hose from the input tee that will be connected to our input line on the fuel pump. So we'll get just a little bit of oil. And we'll slide this onto the input fitting on the fuel pump. Okay, what I'm going to do now is take the zip ties that were included in the kit and start tidying up the work area. I put a zip tie on our fuel hose that goes to the original fuel selector valve. It goes down under the airbox, curves up by the blower housing and hooks onto the selector valve. And I ran it that way so that it's nice smooth bends. Okay, let's go ahead and cut the tails off of these zip ties. And then we'll take a look and make sure that all of our hoses have nice smooth bends. Okay, these hoses are all nicely laid out. Nothing is rubbing against sharp metal. If you wanted to, you could take zip ties and zip tie them in place. There's really not a need for it. The kit will come with plenty of zip ties if you want. At this point, we're going to go ahead and start putting hose clamps on. If you remember, as I stated earlier, there are two different sizes of hose clamps included in the kit. You'll use the smaller hose clamps on the 3/16 hose and the larger hose clamps on the 1/4" hose. Let me take you a moment to show you something about these hose clamps. Squeeze down on them with a pair of pliers to clamp them shut. Let me move this one off a little bit to show you what I'm talking about. If they end up clamped crooked like that, just grip them from the side and squeeze them to get them lined up. If you need to open a clamp, grip it from the side with a pair of pliers and push on it, and it opens up. Don't try to pull it apart. Just push it sideways. This is a 3/16 hose connected to the factory, the factory 3/16 connected to my 1/4" hose. So that's actually going to use a 1/4" hose clamp, which is the larger of the two hose clamps. Then where our 3/16 hose goes on to the fuel selector valve, we're going to use one of the smaller hose clamps. And that's all the hose clamps that we get from this side. Okay, now we're going to put the hose clamps on this end. And remember, there's a fuel filter tucked behind this. So if you reach in and hook the hose that goes between the filter and the hose barb, pull it down and slide the filter this way, it's easier to get at it. The fuel filter is in 1/4" fuel hose. So we're going to put a 1/4 inch fuel hose clamp, which is the larger of the two, at either end of the fuel filter here. And then we'll tuck our filter back up into place the opposite of the way we got it out. Slide it over, push it up into here, and then slide it back. Now remember, there's a hose barb on the back of this fuel fitting. So we're going to go ahead and slide another hose clamp around this hose. Okay, this hose clamp here, you won't be able to see me crimping it. However, I'm going to go ahead and crimp it. And there we go. Now, all three of the clamps on the fuel T are going to be the larger size. Then where the pulse port is on our special valve cover bolt, remember that's a 3/16 hose, so that will use the smaller of the two hose clamps. Then right here we've got the adapter that goes from 1/4 to 3/16, so we're going to put a small clamp on the 3/16 side. And a large clamp on the 1/4 inch side. Coming back over here, you'll notice I missed this adapter, and it is on the pulse port. Now, if this were to leak, it would leak air, not fuel, but still. Let's go ahead and put the hose clamps. The 1/4 inch side is going to take a large clamp, and the 3/16 side, we use one of the small clamps. So that completes the install. The only thing left is the operating instructions. And very simply, to operate it off the stock tank, you do exactly as you did before my kit was installed. If you're running it off the remote tank, you're going to put the fuel selector valve in the off position to run off the remote tank, and on the on position to run it off the stock tank. And that's what line 7 says. Line 7 is not a misprint, where it says move the fuel selector valve to the off position to run off the remote tank. Stick this decal where you can see it clearly. Typically the generator is going to be sitting on the ground. Hopefully you got it sitting on the ground, which means you're going to be able to see down at the top of the tank easily. So I would stick it to the top of the fuel tank. Okay, that concludes our install. The next step is to just look over everything, make sure there's no pinched fuel lines, make sure that you didn't omit any of the clamps, and if you see a spot where you think that there should be one of the zip ties holding a hose in place, go ahead and do so. You'll notice that the fuel pump is easily removed if you want to service the air filter. You just peel it away, it's Velcroed in place, and now you can service the air filter easily. And when you're done, you stick this Velcro back in place and make sure that your hoses are in place. Once again, if you're watching this video on YouTube and you'd like to get in touch with me, if you look in the description section of the video, you'll notice that there is a link to my website, and it has all the information on this product. It also has a good FAQ page. If that still doesn't give you all the information, it's got my contact information, both my email address and my phone number. Please do not attempt to contact me through YouTube, because I don't monitor the comments on YouTube, and if you leave a question on there, it's going to be a considerable amount of time before I ever see it and get back with you. I thank you for your time.